Way back in 2020, we spent more than usual on home electronics and appliances, but now we're in a little bit of an electronics hangover. And overall consumer spending is trending away from goods and in favor of services again. So today we're going to talk about what is the outlook for electronics. Plus, we're going to discover some new physical stores coming from digital native retailers. And are we in a recession? The new data says no, we are not. All of that right now on Everything We Know About Retail. It's the show where we tell you everything we know about retail. We broadcast live on the internet most Thursdays at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, but you can watch us whenever you want. Just head on over to everythingweknow.show and that'll take you to our show archive on YouTube. So, my name is James Cook, and I'm coming to you live from Indiana. The most recent electronics purchase I made, was not me, but it was my wife. She bought, of all things, an Oculus Quest 2 last week. So, Ebere, we're in the cyberspace, the cyberspace. What am I, 100? We're in the metaverse now, Ebere.
I was about to correct you and say, no, we're in the metaverse, James. That's where we are right now. But my name is Ebere Anokute, coming to you from New York. And the most recent electronic purchase I made, again, it wasn't me. It was a gift from my mother, but it was probably my iPhone, I think.
Excellent. So Apple, Meta, we've got two of the biggies covered.
Oh yeah,
Um, so we both research retail and real estate for JLL, and we're here to share with you guys everything we know about retail.
that's true. That's true every week, James. So please tell me, what do you know about retail?
Well, first off, before we get into everything we know about retail, I have a special breaking news item for discussion.
This has never
So
happened before, James. This is
I know.
unprecedented. I'm shaking.
The folks on LinkedIn Live right now who are watching this, their minds are being blown.
I'm sure.
The question on everybody's lips of late has been, are we in a recession? The Commerce Department released the third quarter GDP numbers this morning. Because the GDP is so driven by consumer spending, retail, as it were, I thought it would be appropriate to bring it up. So, eBay GDP grew by 0.6%, which is not negative.
So let's go, is my
Right.
response.
And actually, I mentioned consumer spending. Consumer spending was actually up 0.4%. So spending on goods, this trend that we've been talking about, spending on goods fell, spending on services grew. And we're gonna get into more of that in a little bit as we talk about electronics. So it had been, I'm sure you've been paying attention, GDP had been shrinking a little bit for the past 2 quarters. But now it's up again. And that's actually an annualized growth rate of 2.6%, which is solid. Like, that's not bad. One of the things that economists are like, well, the Fed, anyway, is hoping for is a soft landing, which means they rise interest rates just enough so that we don't go into recession, but inflation comes down. And who knows? With these new numbers, that may be the case.
Right. I mean, that's definitely good news, but is the outlook at all still positive? Is it positive now? Has it changed? Are there some headwinds that we're facing? Like, what does it look like, with this new report for the coming
Yeah.
months?
Yeah. So there are some headwinds. And, there's the typical ones we've been talking about, like gas prices are going up a bit now,
Right.
food prices are up, rent is up, home sales are down, home building is down. The mortgage rate is now at 7%, which is, I want to say, like a 20-year high. I mean, I know you talk to people my parents' age, and they'll say, well, when we first bought our house, it was 14% interest, and you had to put, I don't know, 50% down or something like.
Right.
But in recent times, 7% is quite high, and it's really affecting negatively the home market, which obviously then affects sales of appliances, home goods, and things like that.
Yeah, that's definitely sort of a mixed outlook then. Definitely good news that the GDP is growing, but I think we're still in a sort of cautiously optimistic phase. I think so.
Yeah, so there's definitely headwinds, and then there's this whole other thing with the strength of the US dollar, which means less foreign investment in the US because
Right.
their currencies are weaker. I mean, it sounds like we might get a negative GDP next quarter. I don't know. We'll see. It's too soon to tell.
We'll see.
All right. So anyway, that was our what do we call that? The point of discussion, or I need a
Um,
breaking news graphic. That's what I need.
there you go. That's what was missing. The item for discussion usually comes at the end, which is why I was a little bit all over the place. But yeah, we need to get a breaking news graphic for other economic and other reports like that.
Any hoodles. The first thing we know about retail is we're talking about electronics and the sales of electronics. So we had a 2-year run, which started during the lockdowns, where after that initial dip, we saw really unprecedented growth in electronics and appliance sales. Like in April of 2021, I was looking back at these numbers this morning. The year-over-year sales growth of electronics and appliance stores was 133%.
Wow.
Entirely unprecedented. You don't usually see that. But since March of this year, those year-over-year growth numbers have been negative. So it fell by 8.5% in September.
Do you have any idea what might have caused those sales to fall, especially
Yeah,
in September?
yeah, you could almost call it a hangover
Mm,
from that, drunken frenzy of electronics and appliance buying that we had for that 2-year run where, people were not going on vacation. So they were doing home improvement projects, buying new appliances. Kids needed laptops to do their virtual schooling. Parents wanted
right.
new TVs, all that jazz. Now consumer spending is turning back away from goods, back to services. And we kind of have all the electronics and appliances we need, at least for now. And then the other thing is inflation. So if you're spending more
Well,
on groceries, you're going to spend less on electronics.
yeah, I mean that does make sense. I do feel as though electronics and appliances, like you said, we were buying so much of those during the pandemic. So we can only have so many phones, right? We can only have so many
Right. Yeah.
TVs and Xboxes or whatever else. So, but I mean, does that mean that there isn't a chance for recovery, or what do you think the chance might be for recovery in the future?
I mean, I think the most reasonable recovery scenario is going back to, like, if you go back and look at this category pre-pandemic, it was always just a little bit of growth, like,
Right.
or a little bit of, like what falls 1% and then it grows 1%. So I think the most realistic thing is we get back to those reasonable growth numbers that we saw in, like, 2018, 2019. Right now there's all this inventory buildup. So if you're a consumer, you're going to get some deals this holiday for electronics.
Right.
So I would hot tip expect doorbuster holiday sales, especially in categories like TVs this year. So, all of the whatever, superstores, the Walmarts, the Targets of the world probably have excess inventory of electronics and are be clearing them out. But after that, I think we can expect a realistic inventory level again and kind of a return to kind of, you know, realistic sales, especially as, let's say you got the new iPad or the new iPhone in 2021 or something like that. So now give it a little bit of time. It's time to get a new one. But yeah, so, and then like, retailers are feeling the effects of this. So Best Buy, they saw shrinking same store sales comps. Microsoft had the slowest growth it's seen in 5 years, and they said that was because of poor sales of personal computers. And then today, we're talking about iPhones.
Right.
Apple reports its most recent quarterly sales this afternoon, on the day we're recording this. So, and that will include the new iPhone, like a couple of weeks of the new iPhone sales.
Right.
So we'll start to see from their commentary what their expectations are.
I mean, yeah, we'll have to see, how Apple performs, and obviously these other, earnings announcements are definitely a bit of concern. Although maybe call me naive or too optimistic, but I kind of feel like this is coming at exactly the right time, because I can't imagine that demand for electronics is ever greater than it is during the holidays, right? So, like you mentioned, there's going to be a lot of, sales on TVs, as if I could use another TV, which I absolutely don't need. But for the people that do, who have been waiting, I feel like we might, maybe I'm thinking about it too simplistically, but I think we might be able to correct this with the holiday season, because everyone's going to want to be buying, some electronic for their loved ones, especially if it's at a massive discount. So
Yeah,
remains to be seen.
certainly would expect a bump. I think the problem though with discounts is that it really affects your profits, you
Of
know.
course, of course.
But yeah, I think we'll wait and see. I know you guys recently, and Keisha recently did an episode about our holiday predictions based on our holiday consumer survey. Was there anything specifically about electronics in that survey?
From I mean, obviously Keisha is the actual the expert
Yeah.
for that, but I believe she mentioned something about electronics being one of consumers' most desired purchases. So there definitely seems to be some demand for it when it comes to the holidays. Maybe people are predicting these sort of sales and things. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out. But definitely electronics came up in a lot of the responses to the survey for sure.
All right. So we will wait and see what the future for electronics is. In the meantime, Ebere, what else do you know about retail?
James, I thought you would never ask. Here, the second thing that we know about retail is that digitally native retailers are becoming increasingly active. So, James, I know that you know this entire context, but let me take our listeners on a little bit of a story, right? So, I feel like digitally native retailers had a bit of a boom maybe 5, 6 years ago, when they really started to break into the physical space, and it became clear that omni-channel was like a critical part of any successful business's strategy, right? I remember ICSC published a report where they talked about the halo effect, which described the increase in online traffic that a brand would receive after opening a new physical location in a given geography, right? So there was clearly a tie between the physical retail and the e-commerce. They weren't adversaries the way that it was kind of painted before. And actually, a 2018 JLL report, look at that. We love those researchers over at JLL, found out that online retailers were planning to open 850 new physical stores in the next 5 years, right? Based on what they announced in their, in the media and in their earnings calls and things like that. So, first of all, James, I have to ask you, since we're just about 5 years away from this report, how well do you think those retailers have done? Do you think they hit the 850 number, or I mean, obviously COVID was a gigantic impact on that, but in general, do you think that they were as aggressive as they said they were going to be?
So it's interesting because I remember when we did that piece, and we really did do a whole dragnet of retailer announcements. So
Right.
it was not based on some model. It was based on what retailers were saying they were going to open. And thinking back on some of them have not opened the locations they said they would.
Mm,
Others have opened more. So one example I think would be Warby Parker,
of course.
which is continued. They just did a new announcement. I don't even think you can call them digital native at this point. Back then you would have.
Of
Now they
course.
get more money from physical store sales. So I would honestly say 850 in 5 years. That was good information at the time. I would say, especially because of COVID, I don't think we hit that number.
Right, right. Yeah, no, that's very fair. And Warwick Parker, we're definitely gonna touch on them later on, but they might account for all 850 of these new 850 stores just by themselves. But we did see a little bit of a slowing in recent years of store openings from these digitally native retailers before the pandemic, and then especially coming out of it. But what I think is important to note is that a lot of these retailers benefited from being online only during the pandemic, right? When other retailers with physical stores were not able to open their stores, or mandated closures, there was decreased foot traffic due to decreases in tourism internationally and domestically. These retailers, obviously some of them had some physical locations as well that they had to close, but for the most part they were able to conduct their business online. And while we saw other categories like grocery or maybe even home improvement rushing to ramp up their e-commerce capabilities, these guys were already solid. And so I think that that is contributing to them as we come out of the pandemic being well capitalized and eager to return to what they found to be, I believe, the tried and true method of growth, which is opening physical stores. I do want to add a caveat here, James. I'm hoping you can expound upon. I remember you telling me something recently about customer acquisition costs when it comes to marketing growing in recent years, and for that reason, opening stores might even be a cheaper option when it comes to acquiring new customers than marketing online. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I don't have the most current numbers, but I do know that the cost of acquiring a customer on a place like Facebook or Instagram can be quite expensive. I
Right.
mean, talking like $20 or something like that per customer. Whereas if you were to build a physical store in a high traffic area, you're not going to be spending that much. I mean, the cost per customer, it's just so high because it's such targeted marketing.
Right.
Whereas if you do your targeted marketing in person, it ends up being cheaper. That being said, COVID did affect a lot around that. So for a while there, obviously it would be the only way to acquire customers was online. But I think
Sure.
now that's coming back. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, that's coinciding with some of these new store openings that we're seeing. So, it's again the idea that these digitally native retailers are opening stores isn't a novel concept, but it is important to note that it's sort of ticking up a little bit and to see the ways in which it's being dispersed sort of geographically. So, to start, we have to go to, the original, which is Soho, right? That same report that I mentioned earlier found that New York City was the most desired location for a brand's first store, and specifically Soho was the majority of these brands opted to go there. We have to imagine that that's because of the residential base in the area. I would also argue some of the store formats are right sized for this sort of concept. So that's why we saw that explosion in Soho, and the latest brand to go there is Alpha Industries. So Alpha Industries is a bit of a, I think they're more of a niche brand. I more so see them sold in other stores versus in their own locations, and that makes sense because this new location at 19 Green Street is their first brick and mortar location. So very exciting. And I know we recently saw Parade Underwear had a pop up in Soho that they eventually went permanent on. And so this location here, 3,000 square feet, is a pop up for the next 6 months or so. Although I think, obviously, if they do well, they will be. They'll want to stay in the space. And like we saw with Parade and a bunch of other examples, that is something that's happening a lot these days. So I think that they, might do well and stay there. I really love seeing the curation of their products. They're really known for selling these military inspired jackets. When I think of Alpha Industries, I think of the quintessential bomber jacket, right? I've never gotten one, but I've always told myself next winter is when I'm going to get my first one. I say that every single year. But so maybe now I'm going to go down to the Soho pop up and finally get one. And I can get these military inspired jackets as well as some limited edition and sold out styles and also collaborations that they've done with other brands. So going to be a very dynamic space. And 3,000 is not small, especially for a first location. So I
Yeah.
really love what they've been able to do with the decor in there. Now, James, we're going to follow a lot of the population and go from New York to Miami, where we will see Billionaire Boys Club opened their their fourth location in the Wynwood neighborhood in Miami. So for those who don't know, Billionaire Boys Club is a luxury streetwear label that was founded back in 2005 by Pharrell Williams, who is a producer and musician, and Nigo, who is his longtime collaborator, who was recently named the creative director at Kenzo, which is a luxury fashion house. So Billionaire Boys Club is definitely established in that space. They're opening in 5,000 square feet in Wynwood, and this comes after their locations in Soho, New York, of course, which is where their first location was, London, and Tokyo. So I think that aligns with Nigo and the whole Kenzo. Kenzo is a historically Japanese house. And they partnered with these two very famous architects to create sort of like an art gallery motif within the store. So I think it looks really, really cool. And I mean, this is maybe the most fun part of retail, right? Is seeing
Yeah.
how these brands tailor their stores to, their aesthetic and to the energy that they want to put out there. So I think this is a beautiful example of that, and they're going to have a lot of success there. And I also think it's Interesting that they went to Wynwood rather than the design district. You know, I feel like
Yeah.
that's what we hear a lot about when it comes to Miami these days. But Wynwood still has a lot of drivers to the area, whether it's restaurants, bars, the art walls themselves. And so definitely solid foot traffic there. And I think that they're going to be just fine over there. You mentioned Warby Parker. I don't have an example, a picture of them because they're so well established at this point. But they currently have 190 stores open and plan to open hundreds more. That is what all the articles I read said. So they're not slowing down. They're feeling very active, and they've sort of transitioned from just selling eyeglasses to becoming like a visual healthcare clinic is the way that they're sort of trending. So very exciting. And the last example I want to share is of Glossier. So Glossier opened in Georgetown in DC earlier this year. Actually, towards the end of the summer, they opened in over 7,000 square feet on M Street in Georgetown, in the former Sephora space, right? So Sephora moved two doors down. Glossier took this space. We love to know what uses were where before. And this is, Glossier is one of the most active and I think well-known millennial beauty brands of the moment. And so this is one of 4 locations that they're opening this year. So in addition to Georgetown, they're opening in Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Brooklyn. And this is in addition to their existing flagships in New York and Los Angeles, as well as Seattle, London, and Miami. So Glossier, I don't know if they're going to go the exact Warby Parker route of opening, hundreds of stores. It sounds like they're taking a way more targeted approach, which I think makes sense for, their brand and what they sell. But it's definitely exciting. And I wanted to highlight them in particular because what I've noticed a sort of uptick in these digitally native brands going to Georgetown specifically, right? My first guess was maybe the store formats are just perfectly sized for these brands, and they're finding that with the foot traffic on M Street and Wisconsin, which is really impressive considering that there's no metro in the area, right? There's no subway there. And if you're getting there, it's either by bus, car, or on foot, I think that foot traffic is what contributed to it. But when I read a little further, James, I found out that a lot of these brands are working with Leap, right? Leap being a retail platform that we're very familiar with that helps these digitally native brands to build and operate brick and mortar stores. And they didn't work with Glossier specifically, but they've worked with 4 other brands in the Georgetown area to open stores just this year. So they've worked with a jewelry brand called Little Words Project, a leather brand called Hobo, and a sustainable cashmere brand called Nadam. And they've opened stores in Georgetown all this year, which I think is really cool. And I think it makes sense that, or not even that it makes sense, but it's interesting that Leap seems to be betting big on Georgetown, right? Like I said, I think the fundamentals are there to make it. I mean, it already is a prime bustling corridor, but specifically for these digitally native brands, it feels like Georgetown might be becoming the new hub of those. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, and I mean you mentioned that there's no subway right there in Georgetown, but you've got the university population, and I mean, you think about it, those are probably the primary consumers for a lot of these digital native brands.
Absolutely.
And Georgetown, like that's where you went to college, right? So
It is.
was it back in your day? Was it hopping?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and like it's so interesting to compare back when I was there to when I've been in DC in recent months, and now working in retail to take that sort of lens to how the neighborhood has changed. It's crazy, and it was honestly through walking down that I'm realizing, like, I'm seeing Bonobos and Casper and Avocado Mattress, and I'm like, where these were definitely like that used to be a Chipotle, that used to be like a Dean and DeLuca. Those were not these brands before, so it sort of piqued that in my head, what's going on here. And I mean, like you said, the university population definitely provides that ample foot traffic base. But I have to say, it's not just students in the area, right? Georgetown is really a driver within DC, and you'll see people there who are clearly not student age, right?
Right.
And who, don't even go to the university, just going to Georgetown for the vibe, honestly, and for the, really impressive retail mix that exists there. So, I think there's a lot that makes Georgetown ideal for a lot of these different brands. And I'm going to be watching closely to see if more brands choose to go there, digitally native brands, especially in the coming months. So very exciting stuff. But James, we can't talk about that for forever. Tell me, what do you know about retail?
All right. Well, here's the third thing we know about retail. We're back to electronics, and this is actually a different kind of story. Apple shops in Target stores.
Hmm.
And so this is something that's really been on the rise. And Apple recently had a press release to announce just how big it's gotten. So back in 2021, they started with 17 Apple shops in Target stores. Now they are up to 150. And so the stores are kind of twice the amount of Apple products that you would find in a traditional Target. It's Apple themed. They're not Apple employees, but they're Target tech employees that have been trained by Apple on the Apple products. Um, and this is sort of like the retail experience theme that Target's been going on in a number of areas. So they've done a bunch of Ulta cosmetic shop in shops. They've done the Disney themed ones. I think that was big. I want to say that was last holiday season. We were talking a lot about the Disney shops. They've done Levi's. They've also got the big partnership with Magnolia. So a lot going on. But there's certainly an understanding at Target that they want to be more than just competing on price. They really want to offer an experience along with that value as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. And obviously, shop in shops is a growing trend. But I even feel like Apple may have pioneered the shop in shop idea before we were talking about it on the retail side. Just thinking about their presence in different bookstores, whether it's on campus or
Mm.
elsewhere, right? It's like there's always a couple tables that look distinctively Apple, right? So you know that that is where you can get that stuff done. And obviously, I'm looking currently at 3 or 4 different Apple products around me. So the ability to go to Target and get help, some tech consulting and stuff like that is definitely going to be a benefit. So this sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the shop in shop is really a concept that goes back. I mean, it goes back to the original department stores, really,
Sure.
because there were always sort of themed areas around, often dominated by a specific brand. I mean, I don't know, back to, I don't know, what were they, like Selfridges or
There
something
you go.
like that. But now I really think it's a big differentiator because, I mean, if you're a Target, you're competing on not just value, but people want to come and have some fun, and feel like they're kind of enveloped in that experience, especially around the holidays.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like Target is, you go there for so many other things, and to be able to get some, tech support, or I don't know, perhaps even shop for some new products while you're, looking at groceries and other things is definitely going to be a benefit.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I think for Apple, like why it makes sense for them to do it is like when you go to an Apple store, it's always very busy,
Right.
very crowded. Getting, like the Genius, I don't know, like if you go in and try to get on the wait list to see a Genius, it's going to be a while. Even if you sign up ahead, there's usually some waiting involved. So there's an idea that if there's an Apple trained person at your Target that maybe can help you out with some of this stuff, it pulls some of that pressure off of the local Apple store.
Yeah, absolutely, and they still get the same profits from it, right? So, or I mean, I wonder what the deal is, right? Whether how much of the profiting that Target gets versus Apple. I'm sure that they're getting a cut somewhere, right? They're not just letting Apple pop up in their store just because.
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, we don't actually know what the arrangement is, but Target's buying that stuff wholesale from Apple and then reselling it, but there must be some kind of marketing partnership
Right.
fee, you know, where I honestly don't know, but it is advantageous to both of them. So I think it's a mutually beneficial arrangement.
Agreed. Maybe Target has to pay for those Apple store tables, and that's part of the branding agreement is that they pay for the tables, and then everything else is overlooked.
Yeah. I don't know. But yeah, you mentioned looking around and seeing so many Apple products. I think, and it's so funny because I see one, two, three right here in front of me as well.
Of course.
But I wonder again. I think one of the things that Apple sort of suffers from a little bit is everything they do is really well made. So I do feel like I don't replace, like I can go a long time with an iPhone. I don't need to have the newest one. And I think that's awesome, but it also makes it difficult for them to kind of get the regular, sales. So that's why it's going to be so interesting to see when they do their earnings announcement later today, how the new iPhone, I don't even know what number it is. I lost track. Do you know what iPhone we're at this point?
I'm going to guess 14, but I can't say for sure.
I was trying to remember what year the iPhone came out. And I want to say, I don't know. Like I remember it was like around the time of like the first Daniel Craig James Bond movie, because in the movie Daniel Craig had a smartphone which was blowing everybody away because nobody had really seen those before.
So what was that, like 2006, 2007?
That sounds about right. Yeah,
Right.
that sounds about right.
That's what I would guess as well.
But anyway, yeah, so we shall see. So Ebere, it looks like we've come to the end of another perfectly good episode of Everything We Know About Retail. I just want to let everybody know, if you haven't read our holiday consumer report, you can go over to jll.com. Up next, we're going to be doing our city retail report about urban retail. That'll be available for download too. And we just dropped a new episode of our audio podcast, Where We Buy. It was an interview. Okay, I forget which episode is the new one. It's been a long day, Ebere, but there's a new episode. We've got many more coming, and they are in-depth interviews with retail and retail real estate movers and shakers. And you can find Where We Buy on whatever podcast app you use, or download it over at wherewebuy.show.
Absolutely. And might I add, no one is moving and shaking more than the host of Where We Buy, James Cook, right? So definitely got to tune in there. And also, if you like this show, hit the subscribe button on YouTube and also click on the bell icon so that you're notified when a new show comes out each week. Help us to get out of the crowd so you can make sure you see our new episodes every week.
And if you're a LinkedIn lover, follow JLL Retail on LinkedIn and you'll get notified when we go live on LinkedIn. We'll be back next week. We've got a new episode next Thursday at 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern. So, Ebere, after all of this discussion, what did you learn about retail today?
James, I learned that we are not, maybe, kinda going to have a recession.
And I learned that the next time I need to go shopping for Glossier in person, I now have more places to go do it. Not that I'm not actually going to do that, but anyway. Warby Parker, that's one. I'll go there in person. And if you want to know more of everything we know about retail, you can join us here again next week.